Look up once more. Beyond the glitter you have been taught to admire lies an interior. Geography, a hidden side of the Milky Way that has always been speaking to us. Tonight we rate it as not merely astronomers but as listeners of meaning. Prepare. What you thought was outer will begin to rearrange your inner world. When we speak of the Milky Way, we usually mean banded light, a river of stars arcing across the night. We speak of dust lanes and spiral arms, of star nurseries and ancient clusters. We speak accurately. But there is another way to speak, one that treats the galaxy as topography of the soul, rather than merely as astrophysical object. This is not a metaphor emptied of rigor. It is an alternative cartography, a way of mapping inner constellations by learning to read the exterior ones. The hidden side of the Milky Way offers itself as a landscape where memory and meaning are strewn like waymarkers that our instruments cannot translate without the companioning of the imagination. Think of the way maps function. A map reduces complexity into vectors and nodes so travelers may move. It names rivers, marks passes, warns of marshes. A psychological map does similar work for inner life. It names recurrent emotions, marks places of trauma, warns of patterns of repetition. The Milky Way, with its bridges of light and dark, lanes and resembles such an interior geography. When humans of old pointed at the river of stars and spoke of paths, gates and guardians, they were performing a necessary human labor. They were creating tools for inner passage. To read the galaxy in this manner is not to deny the work of telescopes. It is to complement it. Telescopes show us composition and motion. The imaginal reading shows us orientation and purpose. The two do not compete. They inform one another. For instance, a region dense with star formation looks astronomically like activity, a nursery of new suns. Psychically, that region might correspond to zones in collective life where renewal happens after crisis, when neighborhoods, where creativity revives after despair, communities that emerge new after catastrophe. The external fact and internal process move in parallel worlds. Recognizing the mirror is a technique of wisdom. This approach requires certain skills. One must learn to tolerate ambiguity, to accept that a single region of sky can mean many things depending on context. You must learn to ask layered questions. What does this formation tell us about material conditions? And what does it invoke in the heart? Rare are the modern practitioners trained to ask both. Science trains for the first and many spiritual practices for the second. The synthesis is a new competence, hybrid, humble, and profoundly practical. Consider also the moral implications. When a civilization regards the cosmic map as purely instrumental, it may treat outer space in extractive ways, something to harvest or to exploit. When in contrast, a culture treats those same skies as repositories of story, as places carrying the weight of ancestral memory, its choices shift. This is not sentimental. It affects policies and the kind of exploration funded, the safeguards required, the ethical vows taken by explorers. A deeper map produces wiser action. Learning the hidden topography also reorients the individual life. People whose imaginal literacy is developed can translate their outer astonishments into inner recalibrations. A person who looks up at the river of stars and experiences both awe and fear has an opportunity to let that fear be named, integrated, and turned into a question that opens new pathways of growth. Without such translation, the reaction is more likely to be projection or shutdown. The space outside then becomes a screen for unprocessed material. The person repeats inner dramas on a larger stage. Finally, to treat the Milky Way as inner landscape is to invite pilgrimage. Scientists may take instruments, poets may take pens, but every traveler, scholar, elder, student is invited into forms of initiation. These can be simple, structured retreats where discoveries are reflected upon in circles, dialogues between astrophysicists and elders, curricula that pair calculus with mythology. The point is not to mystify science, but to humanize it, to place discovery within a web that sustains life, rather than merely optimizes output. So stand beneath the luminous river tonight and try this practice. Let your mind map the band, not simply into coordinates, but into memories. What region of your life feels dense with birth? Where is the dark lane where you avoid looking? Where are the clusters of friendship and the voids of abandonment? If you can learn that mapping, you acquire a curious power, the ability to move not only through space but through yourself with gentleness and clarity. The Milky Way's hidden topography becomes, then, a resource for living, an atlas for maturation, not a trophy for conquest. Human intelligence is partly the art of compression. Faced with a flood of details, the mind invents images that hold many motions and meanings in compact form. Stars and constellations are compressions of immense complexity into shapes the imagination can keep. The hidden side of the Milky Way pulses with such images: curving arcs, dark lanes, pinpoint suns that together compose a visual syntax available to cultures that choose to learn it. We can call this the language of stars, a grammar in which memory is shaped and passed. Consider an ancient village that names a group of stars after a founding story. In the telling, children learn about courage, scarcity, migration, not in abstract instruction but embedded in an image that recurs year after year. The pattern of bright and dim points embodies a lesson and therefore acts as a mnemonic anchor. Modern societies, we like to believe, have outgrown such aids, yet the cognitive payoff remains. What has changed is the form of the anchor. Now it is a broadcast, a viral clip, an algorithm. Previously it was a starry pattern that taught the stewardship of seasons. The language remains necessary. When we lose fluency in star language, we become poorer in cultural memory. We forget how to gather experience into images that last. The rapid digitization of culture produces many ephemeral images, but most do not acquire the weight of myth. The Milky Way's hidden side invites us to recover the capacity for durable symbolic formation, the ability to shape images that hold across epochs, and that can be reinterpreted by future minds. This is crucial because stable images anchor ethical patterns and make long-term cooperation possible. There is also a therapeutic function. Images are not only cultural tools, they are intrapsychic instruments. Dreams operate in the same economy: a figure, a house, a river that repeats, offering a compactive feeling for the psyche to process. When a person looks at the night sky with symbolic literacy, they can use outer images to catalyze inner integration. An image of a lone star may anchor solitude into a narrative of initiation rather than abandonment. A pattern of birth and death in the sky can guide someone through grief by providing a larger context of cycle and renewal. Science and symbolic literacy can be partners here. Scientific findings that a region of the Milky Way hosts ancient stellar nurseries, or that certain arms are sites of heavy element enrichment, can be translated into images that teach stewardship and humility. The act of translation is a civic task. Educators, artists, and communicators must learn to carry astrophysical facts into forms that do not reduce wonder into mere data. In that translation is the possibility of a public culture that values knowledge and meaning together. Finally, the language of stars is an ethics of attention. What we pay attention to and how we represent it shapes what we remember and what we forget. A culture that trains attention to subtle pattern in stars, in seasons, in relationships, will act differently from one that trains attention to immediacy and spectacle. Reviving the grammar of the Milky Way's images is therefore a political act. It rewires collective habits and creates the possibility of governance that honors future time and deeper meaning. The hidden side is not only a private chamber of wonder, it is a public resource for responsible human living. We like to imagine that the sky is honest, and that what we see up there is simply what exists. Yet perception is never passive. The human mind is an interpretive organ that not only registers but also projects. It paints its inner texture upon the outer canvas. The hidden side of the Milky Way becomes, for many, a mirror in which unintegrated complexes, ancient fears, and unspent longings appear as things out there. The moral and practical problem is that when projection is unconscious, it becomes directive. We act on fantasies as if they were objective facts. Projection is not sin. It is an anthropological default. Babies project meaning onto faces and objects. Adult societies project doctrines onto natural processes. The remedy is not elimination, impossible, but recognition. The ethical act at the heart of exploration is to inquire about the images we carry. Who is the we that looks? What wounds inform the question? What stories have we told that predispose us to see domain X as threat, domain Y as prize? Consider the language of resources. When the cosmos is framed primarily as resource supply, then that frame shapes exploration agendas, mining missions, extraction technologies, strategic competition. That orientation is a collective projection that locates our scarcity anxieties into the outer world. If instead our projections include reciprocity and caretaking, exploration transforms. The shift is not merely rhetorical. It modifies incentive structures, policy design, and educational priorities. The clinical parallel is instructive. In therapy, a patient who projects anger onto a partner must learn to own their inner rage to stop externalizing it in harmful ways. Similarly, a civilization must learn to convert its collective projections into responsible authorship, naming what we fear in ourselves so that we do not unleash those fears as policies. Rituals of naming and public reflection can function as cultural therapy, allowing projections to be articulated and thereby contained. Projection also implicates the scientist as subject. A researcher's hypotheses are shaped by background assumptions and desires, transparency about motive, institutional disclosure of intent, reflexive practice in methodologies, and the cultivation of plural narratives in peer evaluation. Reduces the risk that projection will masquerade as objective discovery. Reflexivity is not anti-science. It strengthens science by clarifying the frames that guide inquiry. There is a liberating side to all this. Once recognized, projection can be enlisted creatively. The void we see can be intentionally used as a space for intentional myth-making that aims at repair rather than dominion. We can create metaphors that orient societies toward stewardship. Projection, wielded consciously and ethically, becomes a tool for cultural design rather than a trap. The hidden side of the Milky Way is thus a mirror that both reveals and conceals. The task of a mature culture is to learn to look carefully, to see what the sky offers without mistaking our own silhouettes for cosmic decrees. In that disciplined seeing, projection becomes an invitation to self-knowledge and to cooperative imagination. Darkness between stars carries a terror in modern minds, a space to be conquered, measured, eliminated. Yet every artist and every true scientist knows that the void is not merely emptiness. It is a field of possibility, the hidden side of the Milky Way, those regions that we call dark because they do not yet yield the languages of our instruments, is a crucible where novelty forms. To fear the void is to forfeit the creative ground of futures we must invent. The psychology of creation teaches this plainly. In the act of making, one begins with absence. A painter confronts a blank canvas, a composer a silent room. Out of that lack, images and forms arise precisely because there is room for them to appear. The disciplined embrace of not knowing is therefore a precondition for invention. This is a practical discipline, not mystical posturing. It requires methods that protect the slow work of incubation, funding schemes that tolerate long horizons, intellectual cultures that celebrate negative results, teams that rotate between intense measurement and reflective pause. There are practical models to borrow. In design thinking, the define stage intentionally postpones quick fixes to allow problems to be reframed. In ecological restoration, scientists resist immediate technical fixes and listen to systems over seasons. These are applied practices of dwelling in a productive void. We need more of them in astronomical and space policy contexts. Deliberative pauses before irreversible launches, staged deployments with community oversight, moratoria on actions that would close future options prematurely. The void also trains moral imagination. When an outcome is uncertain, leaders must cultivate prudence. Prudence in the classical sense is not timidity. It is the capacity to judge well in situations of uncertainty. This capacity is trainable through scenario exercises, cross-cultural dialogues, and the institutional practice of pre-mortems that imagine failure modes before action. The void becomes a testing ground for ethical attention. On the individual level, practices like contemplative solitude, dream work, and narrative reflection tune nervous systems to tolerate and even value the dark. Such inner practices have measurable correlates in resilience and creative performance. Institutions that support them by structuring time for reflection and by normalizing contemplative practice harvest better decisions and fewer harmful surprises. Finally, we must recognize a spiritual dimension. The void humbles. It teaches that hubristic mastery is not the only virtue. Restraint, patience, and reverence are equal virtues for the era ahead. The hidden side of the Milky Way asks for caretakers, not conquerors. Those who learn to live with the void become the ones capable of stewarding discoveries in ways that sustain life across generations. Human societies are not built on data alone. They are built on stories. Myths are the trunk into which facts are grafted. They shape what is attended to, whom we consider our kin, and how we value futures. The hidden side of the Milky Way is always encountered inside a mythic field. We never approach the cosmic edge as blank citizens. We carry narratives about progress, about destiny, about scarcity or abundance. Those narratives steer the ships we build as surely as physics does. Think of myths as institutions of imagination. They decide which actions will feel legitimate and which will feel monstrous. If the dominant narrative celebrates conquest and accumulation, policies will follow that logic. If the myth values reciprocity and restraint, different institutions will be cultivated. The governance of cosmic scale endeavors is therefore as much about narrative architecture as it is about legal frameworks. Changing myths is not propaganda. It is culture work. It involves education that teaches narrative literacy, how to identify the frames that shape choices and how to craft new frames that support long-term flourishing. Artists, educators, and religious leaders have roles equal to engineers in shaping futures. When a mission is announced, the accompanying stories must be crafted with ethical imagination. What does this mission teach children about our place in the universe? What metaphors will anchor our grandchildren's sense of duty? Policy institutions can operationalize this by instituting narrative impact assessments alongside environmental and economic reviews. They can require consultation with communities and cultural practitioners. They can fund commissions that translate scientific missions into reflective public curricula. In short, the ethics of discovery must be proceduralized. There is also a reparative dimension. Some myths carry the scars of colonial violence and resource extraction. For communities historically marginalized, cosmic engagement may appear as extension of old harms. Addressing that history respectfully is part of ethical exploration. Reparations in symbolic and material forms, genuine co-creation of narratives, and equitable inclusion in decision tables. Finally, myths guide the moral imagination by showing not only what is possible but what is desirable. When myths expand to include experiments in reciprocity, when they teach that knowledge is trust, then the hidden side of the Milky Way can be received as teacher rather than victim. The stories we choose to carry outward will echo back into the institutions we construct. Let those echoes be honorable. A voyage that does not change the voyager is a trip, not a pilgrimage. The true labor of discovery consists not only in going outward, but also in bringing back what the outward taught and letting that teaching transform how we live. Integration is difficult because it requires converting rarefied insight into mundane practice, curricula, laws, rituals, and everyday habits that reflect softer, harder, and deeper lessons simultaneously. Start with education. If the hidden side of the Milky Way reveals that symbolic literacy matters, schools should weave image and story into STEM learning. Students should learn astrophysics and mythography, the equations of stellar motion, and the stories that stabilize civic life. They should practice contemplative attention alongside experimental method. This hybrid curriculum produces citizens who can both compute and care. Second, design governance that values long horizons. Create metrics that measure collective attention, symbolic health, and intergenerational responsibility alongside GDP and technical performance. Funding calls should prioritize projects that include public meaning-making components and ethical integration plans. Agencies should require accountability rituals that include public storytelling about missions, intended moral legacies. Third, craft rituals and public ceremonies that incorporate discoveries into communal memory. When a major finding is published, hold community gatherings. Not only expert panels that allow ordinary people to hear, reflect, and respond. Ritual helps encode knowledge into cultural practice. Without it, discoveries remain ephemeral headline fodder, not durable wisdom. Fourth, invest in narrative repair where harm exists. If early ventures into new domains leave communities behind, institute restorative programs, shared stewardship agreements, participatory governance, and redistribution where appropriate. Integration is not complete when data circulates. It is complete when communities feel themselves participants and beneficiaries. Lastly, integration requires humility. It asks leaders to slow down, to admit mistakes, and to change course. Institutions must create mechanisms to listen and to adapt. The hidden side of the Milky Way is not a prize to be claimed. It is a partner. Treating it as such reshapes technology into artful caretaking. In returning with new sight, humanity is called to a greater maturity, to let discovery refine character, to let knowledge expand compassion, and to let our instruments be servants of a larger ethic. If we accomplish that, the hidden side of the Milky Way will have done what it quietly set out to do, to teach us how to be more fully human.